Ladies and gentlemen, earlier this morning, Donald Trump put out a very important post, not only on his Truth Social platform, but also X. And we know that this is an important post. Number one, because this is what Trump normally does when it's something he wants everyone to see. He'll screenshot, his people will, not him particularly, but his people will screenshot the Truth Social post and then put it on X to amplify it. And number two, he calls Zelenskyy a dictator, and it's very clear when you look at the early stage of this negotiation process between Russia and Ukraine. This is going to be a peace deal, whether the Ukrainians like it or not, from what I see. Before I get into this, I do want to say I am a little bit surprised that there is at least not a Ukrainian representative at these peace talks. I don't really view it as really all that important whether a Ukrainian is there or not in terms of the actual negotiation process, because negotiations are all about leverage and Ukraine has none. They're alive because of NATO. NATO is controlled by the United States. Donald Trump is now the president of the United States. Donald Trump has a very clear opinion of Ukraine. It's more so in the media sense, it's kind of a bad look not to have Ukrainian representation there, but it doesn't really matter whether they're there or not and what they want. It's the United States that controls what Ukraine does. Or you could say NATO controls it. That's where you get the Europe versus the United States and what the differential in between what we want and what they want. And Trump talks about it here. And this is a very good talking point, what Trump is saying. I'm going to get to it in a second. But it's the idea of the United States being in a different position than the European countries. If you're looking at a war in Eastern Europe, there should be more of a burden put on the European countries to protect themselves and have the proper militaries to guard against Russia, rather than relying on the United States, a country that is separated with a massive ocean in between Europe and us. So that's why it really makes no sense for us to care as much about this war, which certainly we do. You're talking about Russia invading Ukraine, and obviously Trump has come out pretty aggressively against Ukraine in terms of that. And there's if you're taking the Russian side, it's more of a historical precedent rather than the recent events, because it was a Russian invasion of Ukraine, but history tells us that Ukraine was a part of Russia. The areas that Russia currently occupies mainly are comprised of people that speak Russian. And when it comes to the negotiation, from what I've heard, it seems like it's going to be potential referendums. They're talking about doing elections, possibly trying to get Zelenskyy out of leadership within Ukraine. Trump mentioned it yesterday, talking about Zelenskyy's approval rating being at 4%. That's I'm wondering where he got those numbers from. I think it's more of a propaganda tactic is what it is. But Zelenskyy's approval rating has gone down. It was like 69%. It's down. There's reports it's in the low 50s, high 40s. Ukrainians, a lot of them want this war to be over. That's why Zelenskyy was like 75% approval rating. They galvanized behind him back in 2022, but now they're tired of it. I mean, that's like the American point of view. But it is obvious here that it seems like Trump is really, really pushing this war to be over. And when you say stuff like this, talking about Zelenskyy taking Americans spending around $350 billion going into a war that couldn't be won, the verbiage of that, I'm sure Ukrainians are going to take offense to. They really didn't go into a war. But I mean, you understand what Trump is saying there, I guess. They never had to be started. A war that without the U.S. and Trump, they will never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't Sleepy Joe demand equalization, in that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us? We have a big, beautiful ocean as separation. And then that's just, to me, that's the most obvious thing out of this whole situation. NATO is thought of to be this all-encompassing, we're all in this together, everything we do, we agree to. We're at different points in terms of where our countries are, just geographically. So why would we care as much as Europe? And then it's like this guilt trip, like, you don't care about Russia taking over the world, how dare you? No, that's not the point. I mean, number one, they have to jazz up Russia to be this huge threat because that's how they get the money, and they're very scared of Russia. But Russia, just in the way the modern world is, there would be a significant nuclear escalation before 25% of Europe was taken over by Russia. So it wouldn't even matter. The idea is we're trying to avoid that escalation. And the only way to do that would be through a peace deal. And the peace deal, in the way in which it would be negotiated, would likely not include Ukraine getting the territory that's already been lost back, the territory in Eastern Europe, because there's nothing Ukraine can offer Russia outside of saying we're not going to join NATO, which is, it's something. But based on what Russia's lost in terms of this war and the negotiation leverage they hold, especially now with Trump, who, let's make no mistake about it, it's for Russia, this is a little bit more positive of a development when it comes to Trump coming in and saying this about Zelenskyy. There's no questioning that. But I think Trump is mainly trying to get this into a situation to where, whether Ukraine likes it or not, the United States controls what happens in this war due to the amount of money we give Ukraine to keep them afloat. And we don't want the war to continue. The current U.S. administration does not want the war to continue. So the war is going to stop. And it will be divvied up. We will have a negotiation process. And it's going to require very likely a demilitarized zone with territory possibly becoming independent of Ukraine, and then having a referendum to join Russia, or just joining Russia in general, with Crimea being recognized as part of Russia, which I don't understand how Ukraine would get Crimea back. I don't know what the EU is saying, how is there a, again, the only thing I can think of is some type of NATO escalation in terms of getting that land back in Eastern Europe. But there's no, or, Eastern Ukraine. But there's no other way to really do it unless you have crazy sanctions that you can put on Russia that threatens them to the point to where they say, please don't do this, we'll give it up. But they've already done the sanctions in 2022 when the war broke out, and it didn't necessarily completely destroy Russia. So I'm not sure what they're suggesting other than war escalation with the help of NATO. If they want that land, well, they're like, well, it sets a bad precedent. A big power is able to invade a smaller country and take land. What do you want us to do here? If you want to force Russia back, we can. I'm sure NATO could probably do that, but then that escalates it. And it's like, well, Russia's totally bluffing. I mean, where's your intel coming from? It's like all these, it's just normie liberals saying it. Okay, do you have Russian intelligence telling you that? You know that with Putin? I mean, no one thought he was, I didn't think he was going to invade Ukraine in 2022. It just seemed like such a crazy thing to do in the 21st century. But you've got Zelenskyy being called a dictator without elections. And so this is Trump trying to demand elections. They're saying Zelensky's got a horrible approval rating in Ukraine. And I mean, his approval rating has gone down. He is right in that. And you can see Trump saying, in the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something I'll admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Well, that's right. There was no actual... I don't even remember what Kamala Harris had said about what was going to be happening to the Russia-Ukraine situation. It seems like they were going to keep funding Ukraine into oblivion. I really don't know what liberals were hoping was going to happen. I mean, the war at this point, it's grinded to a halt as it is. I'm not sure what the actual policy was from the Harris campaign and from liberals in terms of how they were going to handle this war. I guess it was just going to be keep giving money to Ukraine to try and weaken Russia. But at this point, we are trying to end this. Trump said he was going to end it. And listen, let's see what the negotiation is. Let's get the ceasefire, and let's see what it ends up being. That's what I would say. It is a little bit surprising that there isn't any Ukraine representation, because it's only a media prop, right? It doesn't really matter what the Ukrainian representation says in terms of a peace deal, because the United States controls it because they control NATO. Now, if the European countries contributed 80% to NATO and US was at 20%, then Europe could say, no, this is not happening. We can do a peace negotiation, but this is what we want. Europe is, at this point, they can offer input to the United States, but what they say doesn't really matter because it's about the dynamics of who contributes the most to NATO. And it's obvious it's going to be the United States at well over 50%. So the United States then has full power in a negotiation process with Russia, and also more so even with Ukraine, in terms of Ukraine saying, I mean, we would like this, but we really can't demand anything because the only reason we're afloat is because of NATO, and who controls NATO, or you don't want to say controls, but who is the biggest player in NATO times 10? It's the United States. If NATO was more evenly split, like the United States contributed 33%, Europe contributed a total of 50%, now you're talking about a more balanced negotiation process between the United States and Europe in terms of input. But what Trump is saying here, the point that I like, is we're on a different path than Europe is in our viewpoints of Russia at this stage in the 21st century. And so we're not going to sit here and sacrifice all of this money and everything for Ukraine because we're scared of Russia. Now, you might be scared of Russia. You need to go through a rearmament period. You need to up your militaries more and reject liberalism. You can do that. That's well and good, and that's fine, and that's your right as a country. But it's all, these countries are all very liberal. They've toned down their militaries. They're trying to build them back up here recently because they got scared about the invasion. But it's like they're obsessed with the United States, and they're saying, how dare you? We're just at different points. You're the ones that are landlocked with Russia, not us. And I'm not saying I hope you get invaded by Russia. I'm just saying you can't sit here and say we're all in this together. It's all the same thing. No, it's not. We're separated by a massive ocean. We care about way more about what's going on in the United States than what's going on in Eastern Europe. And again, that's not to say we want Russia to take over Europe. They can't do it. They obviously, you look at their struggles taking over even Ukraine at this point, and certainly NATO's helped with that, make it hard for them. But it's just a different mindset for American citizens versus Europeans. Europeans want American citizens to act like Europeans and say, it's NATO, how dare you? Everything is the same. We're all the exact same. We all need to be on the side of the Ukrainians in this, but we're located in a different area. We don't have the same worry about Russia that you guys do. So why are you so reliant on us if you're so scared of Russia taking over Europe? And most of them are not. Zelenskyy did say that, just because I understand you're trying to negotiate, and you have to, that's part of the negotiation. You have to fearmonger about it to say we need more money so we can have more leverage in this. But it's looking like they're not even invited to the table, Ukraine, for these negotiations. So we will see what ends up happening with this, but it looks like there will be a negotiation, and I'm not sure exactly what the Ukrainians mean when they say we're not going to accept an agreement. Where is your funding coming from? Is it coming from Europe, I guess, to continue the war? The dynamic is the United States funds Ukraine, and if the United States and this administration says no more, there's going to have to be a peace negotiation, whether you like it or not. And I'm talking about to Ukraine, whether they like it or not. So either way, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.